I was on a 125 for just over a year, about 14 months or so. And in that time I covered maybe just over 2,000 miles on that bike, including some long trips. I think the longest I did in the day was like 200 miles or something. It's definitely doable on a 125. When I first moved to my Rebel 500, which I had that for a couple of weeks, and then to this, the Z400, it's just night and day. The difference is huge. And actually I remember getting this bike and it felt uncontrollable to me, you know. I was thinking, like, how am I ever going to be able to ride this safely? Every twitch of the throttle, you could tell it had so much power. I mean, it's all relative, you know. It's still a 400cc bike. It's not huge, but you know, this is right at the top of the A2 limit, so this is about as powerful as you can get. You know, you can get bigger bikes and restrict them, but they're going to be about this power. And yeah, just go for a 125 for this. It was massive. But let's talk about the power, because yes, they are a lot more powerful. Whatever A2 compliant bike or unrestricted bike for that matter you get, it's going to be a lot more powerful than a 125. Even a 250, it's still going to be 2-3 times as powerful. So I kind of said at the start that I thought that I'd never be able to control it. It was really scary. You know, it was fun, but like now I'm doing 46, so I'm going to slow down a touch because it's 40 here. And that kind of thing just happens without you even noticing, to be honest. And, you know, that's on a slow bike, you know, relatively. So I kind of said, you know, I don't know how people ride these, you know, 1000cc bikes and whatever. And everyone I've spoken to says, well, you kind of just get used to it. And I'm sure that's true, because that's how I felt about this bike. But one thing I can say about these bigger bikes is you have to be a lot smoother. Whatever you do, brakes, throttle, clutch, you can't get away with just thrashing the bike like you can on a 125. They're not as forgiving. If you start, you know, grabbing a fistful of throttle and dumping the clutch, you're going to end up in a bad situation more quickly on a bigger bike than you would on a 125. The things that I really started to notice with my 125 were mainly the acceleration or lack of acceleration, and the brakes. The brakes were just terrible. You know, you'd be braking and they'd be thinking about it. You know, my 125 had a new front brake disc and pad, so it wasn't that. It was just the brakes that were on there were just not that good. When I came to this bike, the stopping power just felt immense. It was like, you know, the bike would stop before I'd even told it to. It was great. And I think these are the things, you know, you think going from 125 to a bigger bike and you think it's all going to be about power and acceleration, and you know, a lot of it is, but a lot of it's also just these quality of life things, you know. For example, these bikes, because they got a lot more power and a lot more torque, you know, when you're moving away from a stop, you can just use the clutch on its own. And sometimes it will stall, but it's more difficult to stall a bigger bike than it is to stall a 125. A 125 will stall, you know, just for the fun of it, really. I was really nervous when I was taking my A2 training, and I was wondering if there was a way that I could sort of practice before taking my training. And I'm going to make separate videos about how to sort of prepare yourself for your test if you're on a 125, but the best way I'd say to practice it is to practice smoothness, because the bigger bikes are a lot different in terms of how they handle. So you can't really practice, you know, some of your maneuvers and whatever. Of course you can, but you're going to have to sort of relearn them, at least to some extent. So yeah, I'd say the most valuable thing to practice on your 125 is smoothness, you know, and you sort of will have to relearn it a little bit once you get on the new bike, but as soon as you've got a feel for the clutch and the throttle and the brakes, you know, all of those good habits that you've built up on your smaller bike will carry over. You know, like when you come to a stop, don't just grab a fistful of front brake, because the bike's gonna, you know, the forks are gonna compress, and when they're uncompressed, they're sort of gonna buck you off to one side. Whereas if you stop nice and smooth using both brakes, sort of release the front brake a little bit more as you come to a stop, the bike's gonna stop in a nice, smooth, straight line. That kind of thing you can definitely practice on your smaller bike, and it will translate to a bigger bike. Mainly, they're just a lot more fun. It's not about going super fast, it's not about going, you know, the first thing you Google is like Z400 top speed. Yeah, it's not about going the top speed, it's about just enjoying yourself more, being able to pull away more quickly, being able to stop more quickly. These are things that make motorcycling fun. You know, when you're on your 125 and everything's a bit of a chore, even just pulling away from traffic lights is a chore, you know, that's the kind of thing that takes away from the enjoyment, in my opinion. Especially depending on the kind of riding you do. If you do a lot of motorway miles, you know, struggling to get up to speed, it's a scary experience. Whereas, you know, cruising at 70 and knowing that you still have 30-40 miles per hour in the tank, it's a lot more reassuring.
Getting used to your first big bike will kind of happen naturally, and I think the best advice I can give is just to take it easy for a week or two. It's a lot easier said than done, and I can't say that I always followed that advice, but it really is the best and safest way. Take it on some familiar routes, familiar journeys, roads that you know really well, and just get used to the weight, the handling, and the acceleration of the bike. I also think it's a really good idea to take it somewhere where you can open it up and get used to how it accelerates and how fast it can go, but somewhere safe. I'm talking slip roads onto motorways and dual carriageways. You'll really get to know your bike quite well once you've taken it on some faster roads like this. Other than that, just enjoy it and have fun with it. You really will get used to it a lot more quickly than you think. And if you're on a 125 and you're looking to upgrade to a bigger bike, I would highly recommend it. Safe riding, and I'll see you in the next one.